Good day, everyone. Welcome back to Oral Communication and Context. For our fourth lesson, we will be talking about the verbal and nonverbal forms of communication. For today, we will be discussing the different aspects of voice usage, characteristics of an effective voice, factors influencing voice, and some things to consider when we are using verbal communication. For the next half of our lesson, we will be discussing the different categories of nonverbal communication, different types of nonverbal communication. I will also be giving some examples of nonverbal communication. People communicate in many different ways, and every time we do so, it always serves a specific function. These functions highlight how humans use language for different purposes. Each function stresses on how language is utilized and how it is affected and influenced by time. Our body has a language of its own. All of us are receptive to these forms of communication. More often than not, both of these modes of communication are used hand in hand to promote better understanding, side by side. A combination of verbal and nonverbal communication will make communication more effective. So what is verbal communication? When we say verbal communication, it simply refers to an interaction in which words are used to relay a message. So basically, when we say verbal, it means that we are using our voice. We are using our oral facilities to deliver the words that we are saying, or the words that we want to relay, the information that we want to relay to our receivers or listeners. Like what I have mentioned earlier, it is mostly relayed through speech or with the use of your voice. Now let's talk about the different aspects to voice usage. How can we effectively project our voice in order for us to, of course, effectively communicate as well? Let's begin with the volume of your voice. So when we say volume, we simply refer to how loud or how soft we are projecting our messages. The fact that we change the volume whenever we talk. Some words are said out loud, some words are said softer than the others. All right? It's because there are meanings attached to it as well, and there are intentions attached to it as well. So it's very important to be considerate when it comes to using the volume of your voice. So again, volume refers to how loud or how soft your voice is projected. Next is the pitch. If volume is how loud and how soft, pitch on the other hand is how high or how low your voice is projected. Alright, so pitches may vary depending, of course, on the message or the intention of the message that you are saying or the words that you are saying. Okay, the sentence that you are saying. So it might vary depending on the rules of the language as well. Next, we have rate. Okay, rate simply refers to how fast or how slow we are delivering our message. So it really would depend on who you are talking with, who you are talking to, or the message that you are sending. Okay, so the rate, once again, is how fast or how slow you are delivering the words, delivering the message, how fast or how slow you are talking. We also need to consider, in terms of using our voice, the quality of the voice that we are projecting. Is it good enough? Okay, is it audible to our listeners, to our receivers of the message? Could they understand it easily? You would notice that there are certain people, when they talk, even if they are delivering reliable information or correct information, but the quality of their voice is not good, then people will not listen to them. Their receivers, their listeners, or their audience will not listen to them because the quality is bad. And who would want to listen to a voice that is not of high quality? Another aspect of voice usage is the way that we utilize pauses. Okay, pauses are short stops. They are utilized in order for us, of course, to breathe properly. Remember that when we are talking, we mainly use our oral facilities, our mouth, our tongue, our throat, which is, of course, connected to our respiratory system. And our respiratory system is designed in order for us to breathe, to let air out and let air in. Okay? So pauses are very essential because they allow the proper circulation in and out of the air as we talk, as we speak. You would notice that when you talk fast without any pauses, it feels as if you ran a marathon. It's because the air was not able to circulate properly in our respiratory system. Okay, that is why it's very important for us as speakers to practice pauses. Okay, aside from that, of course, there are certain messages or intentions that could be relayed effectively when we pause whenever we talk. Next, we have emphasis. When we say emphasis, you are simply highlighting certain words, okay, or specific words in your sentence, in your message, okay? We want to stress on this particular word because we want to give more meaning to it, or we want our listeners to know that this word, these specific words or phrases are important, are vital to understanding the intention, the purpose, the message itself. Last but not the least, in terms of using our voices in communicating, you also need to consider variety. You would notice that when you talk, it's not monotonous. More often than not, it varies volume, it varies pitch, it varies rate, it varies in quality. Okay, so there is variety. By default, there is already variety. It's just a matter, of course, of knowing when to change it up. Okay, when to give that flavor to your voice usage. Aside from good knowledge, of course, of the different aspects of voice usage, a voice could be considered effective when it is, number one, first and foremost, audible. When we say audible, it could be heard without any problem by your listeners. All right? So your listeners were able to understand the message, the content of your message, because they were able to hear it properly without any problems. So, for example, if you are speaking in front of a large audience, what could make your voice more audible for them? You don't need to always shout it out loud. You can talk louder than normal, louder than usual, but you can also utilize certain things such as a microphone or probably a megaphone to adjust the volume of your voice to make it, of course, even more audible for your audience. Another characteristic of an effective voice is it being pleasant. So meaning it simply should be of good quality. Alright? So there are certain people that have problems with this one because their voice by default may not be as pleasant as they would want it to be. However, there are of course certain things that you can still do to make it even more pleasant. Why not talk slower compared to others, all right? So why not modulate your voice properly? So things like that could also make or help make your voice more pleasant. A voice is also considered effective when it is fluent. When we say fluent, we simply refer to one's ability or capability to use a language effectively in order for him or her to express himself or herself. Alright? So when you are able to express yourself using language without experiencing any problems, without experiencing any difficulties, then one could be considered fluent. Another key characteristic of an effective voice is its flexibility, its ability to adapt to different situations, its ability to adapt to different communicators. All right. So when you have that ability in your voice, it could change its tone, it could change its pitch, it could change its volume at an instant. And it's appropriate. Those changes, those adjustments are appropriate to the situation or the communicative situation wherein it's used. It could be considered flexible. Nevertheless, when engaging in verbal communication, there are also certain factors that you have to consider. These other factors include, first and foremost, the appropriateness, okay? Is it appropriate for you to talk? Is it appropriate for us to use our voice? Is it appropriate for us to speak up? This would be determined by the situation or the communicative situation wherein we are a part of. It simply refers to the context of the communicative situation, okay? So, does it require you to talk in a formal manner? Does it require you to just speak up in an informal way? So, you have to consider those things as well. Another factor to consider is brevity, or the way that we shorten our words, okay? Being direct to the point, being concise, basically, being straightforward about our message, our intentions, and the purpose of communication, okay? So, brevity is also your ability to avoid fillers. Fillers are simply short phrases or expressions that we insert in between our messages because we are trying to still process in our head what is it that we are going to say. Okay, so take for example, yeah, those are what we refer to as fillers. The third one is clarity. You just simply have to be clear with whatever it is that you are saying, okay? So make sure that whatever needs to be included in the message is already there. Similarly, clarity also refers to our ability to express what it is that we want to say. When we are referring to ethical communication, we are considerate of our listeners, the other people that we are talking with. Alright? So we are considerate of their roles in the society, their gender, their race, their preferences, their culture. Okay? Because we don't want to cause any harm. Our intention is pure. It's clean. Okay? Our intention is just to relay an information, to communicate whatever it is that we want to say. We don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to make them feel bad. So you have to consider those things as well. Another factor is vividness. Vividness is our ability to describe and create a picture of our message to our listeners, to our receivers, okay? So we want our listeners, our receivers of the message to imagine what is it that we are talking about, especially if we are talking or telling a story, for example. So we want to paint that picture in their head. And how do we do this? In vividness, you describe. So when you describe, you use adjectives and make sure that those adjectives could easily be understandable for your listeners. One important factor to also consider is the way that you say things, the way that you say out your words. Okay, this is simply your pronunciation of the words. There are certain words that if you pronounce them incorrectly, they might change their meaning. So you have to be careful with your pronunciation as well. Together with pronunciation is the way that you articulate your words. When we say articulation, we simply refer to how we are utilizing our oral facilities. How do we use our lips? How do we use our teeth, our tongue? Okay, in communicating, because with proper articulation, more often than not, it would result to proper pronunciation of the words as well. Proper articulation and of course proper attachment of meaning will result to good pronunciation or better pronunciation. Dialects also need to be considered in using verbal communication. Remember, dialects are differences in language, okay? So language is different from dialects in such a way that dialects could be variations of just one language, okay? So Basically, it's still the same. It holds the same meaning. The words are the same. However, there could be differences, for example, in structure or certain words that are being used. But still, they are variations, simply variations of a bigger family of language. Now that we have talked about the different elements of verbal communication, let's move forward to nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is simply the opposite of verbal communication. So if in verbal communication you are using your words, your voice in order for you to communicate, to connect with other people, in nonverbal communication, we don't do that. Okay? So nonverbal communication refers to any kind of interaction wherein behavior is used to convey and represent meanings. Okay? We don't necessarily use our words. We don't necessarily use our voice, but rather it is our body. It is our expressions. It is our disposition. It is our behavior that is doing all the talking. So according to Vaughan and Hogg in 1998, they describe nonverbal communication as the transfer of meaningful information from one person to another by means other than written or spoken language. So these are simply the kind of interaction wherein words are not used. There are three main categories of nonverbal communication. The first one is what we refer to as sign language. By definition, sign language includes all codes in which numbers, words, and even punctuation signs have been replaced by gestures. Okay, so take for example the Filipino Sign Language and the American Sign Language. So each movement of the fingers, all right, each movement of the fingers represent a specific letter. Each movement of your hand, each movement of your arm represents meaning. Take for example, this one would mean family. Okay, this one would mean thank you, and so on and so forth. So those could be used as a form of sign language. The second category is what we refer to as action language. How is this different from sign language? In sign language, there is a specific meaning attached already to that or assigned already to that particular action. So when you do this, it already means A, for example. All right? In action language, these are movements that are not used exclusively as signals. What do we mean by action language? A good example of this is when you scratch your head, okay? When you scratch your head, it does not necessarily, it could mean different things depending on the situation or on the context. So there is not really a very specific meaning assigned to it already. So when you scratch your head, it could mean confusion. It could mean that your head is just itchy. It's just, you just want to scratch it. Okay. Or it could mean that you are having difficulties understanding something. Okay. So it could mean different things as well. So that could be a form of action language. Another thing is when we cover our mouths. Okay. Or when we cover our noses, that could be a form of action language. The third main category in nonverbal communication is object language, okay? This is intentional and non-intentional display of material things, meaning these are the things that represent you in a physical way or in a physical manner. All right. So take for example your clothes, the clothes that you are wearing, the objects that you are using. Okay. For example, your accessories, your hair accessories, your jewelry. Okay, the way that you flaunt your material possessions. For example, your laptop, the brands of your things. Those could all be object language. So when we talk or when we communicate using an object, it could be intentional and non-intentional, okay? So consider this. For example, why is it that there's a question posed in the internet wherein people were criticizing owners of iPhones because they love to take selfies in front of a mirror. Okay, so one of the few things, one of the few explanations that the internet offered for that, or the netizens of the World Wide Web offered for that, is because those people who take selfies in front of a mirror, they want to flaunt the brand of their phones, or the brand of the phone that they are holding, okay, or the quality, the kind of phone that they have, which could be true in some cases, and which could, of course, be not in some cases. So this is the reason why that whenever we present ourselves in public, we also need to consider how we do it in a physical way. The way that we dress up, the way that we wear our jewelries, even what kind of jewelries we are wearing, even what brand of clothes we are wearing, or even what designs of clothes we are wearing. So you have to consider that, because people are gonna be quick to make assumptions based on those things, okay? Because in that way, you are also communicating something to them, okay? If you wear jewelry, for example, that means that you have money to buy jewelry, or it's something that you possess, something that you own, which others may not have, okay? So another very good example of this is when someone gets engaged, okay? They wear their ring, okay, as a sign of their engagement. So that is object language. Here are some other types of nonverbal communication. The first one is what we refer to as kinesics. It's simply the study of how your hand, your arm, your body, your face moves as a form of communication. And kinesics is actually considered to be the most well-known type of nonverbal communication. Take this one for example. When a teacher walks in the room, you are in a classroom and a teacher walks inside the room, you would notice how students would straighten their bodies up, fix their things, even without the teacher telling them to do it. Okay, same in an office setup. If your boss walks by, you would notice that your body automatically reacts to it by straightening up your body or trying to go back to doing some work. So those things could communicate something already. We also have this thing we refer to as haptics, or the study of communication through touch. Okay, so this is, aside from kinesics, this is also one of the most effective way of using nonverbal communication. Okay, why? Because it's direct. You are using your hands, your arms, of course, to represent meanings or to deliver messages. A very good example of this one is when your friend is feeling down and you don't, even if you don't have any words to say, even if you don't say anything, but you give them a hug, it already says a lot. Okay, it says that you are here, or you are there, you are caring for them, and so on and so forth. All right, so the power of touch is also a very good tool in communicating what we want to say. Okay, even kisses, for example, they could be considered as a form of haptics. On the other hand, when we refer to the study of how space and distance influence communication, then that is proxemics. When we say proxemics, we have different ideas of what is close, what is distant. I don't know if you have noticed this, but if a person, for example, lives in a province or in a suburbs, all right, or in the suburbs, you would notice that their concept of space is, or distance rather, is different from those people who live in the city. So, take for example, if someone says it's just close by in the suburbs or in the province, their distance is quite longer than what people in the city who have lived in the city will assume it to be. Okay, so another good example of this one is how we are willing to sacrifice our personal space whenever we ride public transportation. Okay, whenever we commute, for example, going from school or going from the house, going to the school, you are willing to sacrifice your personal space because you want to get there on time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you enjoy it, but rather you don't have anything else left to do. Okay, so those things as well, how we value our personal space, that could also refer to proxemics. Okay, so if you are feeling uncomfortable, take for example, even if that's a close friend already, okay, sitting beside you and you're uncomfortable with that, then that could be proxemics. On the other hand, if it's about time affecting communication, then that could be referred to as chronemics, okay? Chronos meaning time, okay? So it refers, chronemics simply refers to the study of how time influences or affects communication. A very good example of this one is when you are late for work, it's not okay. So take for example, you have a meeting and you are late for the meeting, it's not okay. But if you are the boss who is late for the meeting, it's acceptable because you are the boss. It's saying that it doesn't really matter if you are late because you own the company, you run the company, it's okay. That's how chronemics work. Even if we do not use our voice or if we do not say out loud sentences, phrases, or words, there are certain verbal aspects of communication that we use and are considered to be non-verbal or forms of non-verbal communication. These are what we refer to as paralanguage, okay? And this particular study is what we refer to as vocalics. So vocalics is defined as the vocalized but not verbal aspects of non-verbal communication. This simply refers to how we manipulate and utilize the different aspects of voice usage whenever we talk without even having to say a single word. Okay, so take for example, when you talk to your crush, the pitch it's higher, it's very different. Sometimes you even talk in a baby voice, okay? Or if someone is close to you or you're comfortable with that person, the way that you talk with them is very different. All right? So more often than not, when we say paralanguage or vocalics, it simply refers to how we manipulate and utilize pitch and volume in using the language or even the tone of the language that or the tone of our voice that could be considered as vocalics.
Other examples of nonverbal cues include stares, smiles, manners of walking, standing and sitting, physical appearance, style or attire, attitudes toward time and space, personality, movements, and gestures. These nonverbal cues complement a verbal message by adding to its meaning. They can also be used to substitute for verbal messages or emphasize whatever is being said.
Now remember that for one to be considered an effective communicator, a person needs to boost his or her verbal expressions with non-verbal ones. So what is this one saying? What I want you to understand is it doesn't necessarily have to be choosing between which form of communication to use. Okay? It's a matter of complementing one with the other. So it's not about choosing whether I have to stay with verbal communication or I only have to use verbal communication or I only have to use non-verbal communication in this situation. No, it doesn't work that way. When you strike a good balance between using verbal expressions and non-verbal ones, then you would be an effective communicator because more often than not, our verbal communications will find or will give more meaning, will show more meaning when it is complemented with non-verbal ones. So like what I am doing right now, every time that I talk, I use my hands as well for gestures. If I want to emphasize things, I would use my hands to emphasize on those things. So in that way, I am also communicating to you and emphasizing meaning with whatever it is that I want to say. Again, simply put, when you want to be an effective communicator, you have to enhance your verbal expression or your verbal communication with non-verbal ones. Thank you for joining me today. Here are my sources and references for this lesson. See you all again next week.